looked at three group of people coming and asking question to Jesus. Basically, Sanhedrin sent people, right? So first, Sanhedrin sent group of Pharisees and Herodians to talk about taxes. Is it right to pay? Should we pay tax to Caesar? Then we saw Sadducees came. Sadducees were mainly were working with the temple, but they don't believe in the afterlife. They don't believe in resurrection. So they were bringing up an example, taking an example from Leviticus about a levirate marriage. He said, well, in a family had brothers, and for example, the first brother marries and he died without a child. The second brother has to marry the same lady to raise children. But the question was that the family had 7 brothers. 7 brothers died. They married the same lady and they all died. So in the resurrection, this lady will be the wife of which brother? The first brother or the last brother? That was a question asked, and Jesus replied, no, there is no marriage in heaven. The marital relationship doesn't have much significance in heaven. That is what Jesus was trying to answer. Then there was a question about greatest commandment. A scribe came. They asked to Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus answered very well, taken from the Shema passage of Jewish people. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. We saw that Jesus is answering. Now, today we are looking at some of the important part of Mark Gospel. I believe we are going to end this Gospel. I think, hopefully, I wanted to end today. All right. So we are going to look at a particular passage that talks about tribulation period. So we are going to park some time, spend some time on that passage as we explain. All right. So, but before that, there are a few things that we need to commend here. Point number E, Jesus' warning against hypocrisy and his commendation of the widow's offering. This is somewhat loosely composed collection revolving around Jesus' teaching about hypocrisy in the temple area during the Passion Week. Remember, Jesus Christ is coming to the end of his life. The last week, right? The last few days, he's going to die very soon. Right now, so here, this chapter 12 begins a new section actually. The collection begins Jesus questioning the scribes as to the true nature of the Messiah. This is followed by his warning the crowds about hypocrisy of the scribes. They are not able to answer. All right, so the collection ends with Jesus using widow's offering as an illustration of her faith. Let's look at, first of all, true nature of the Messiah. Jesus is questioning scribes about it. Following his questioning, Jesus is now, after questioning Jewish leaders, now Jesus began to teach in the temple area, right? Remember, it is a huge compound. Temple area is a huge compound where, acres of land, right? And Jesus began to teach. And so the crowds were there. He asked them a question. This is what he asked. Did the scribes say that the Messiah was simply the son of David? Does scribe teach us that Messiah will be the son of David? Jesus actually quoted from Psalm 110, verse 1, where the Lord, that is Yahweh, directed the Messiah to sit at his right hand until Messiah's enemies are placed in subjection to him. Jesus noted from this verse that David himself, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, referred to the Messiah as my Lord. This being true, Jesus continued, how is that David called the Messiah, who is his son, Lord? Right? That is a big question. Psalm 110 is written by David. David is calling Messiah my Lord. But who is Messiah? Who is Messiah? Messiah is actually David's son. So that is the problem. How can David call his own son my Lord? Right? So that was the question that Jesus asked. Clear implication from what Jesus was saying was that this psalm taught the deity of the Messiah. Even though Jesus is the son of David, but Messiah is not only a human being, he's also what? God. And Mark noted the crowds were enjoying hearing Jesus talk. Crowds really liked Jesus' teaching. So Jesus was trying to say, Old Testament, what does the Old Testament says? Messiah is not only a human being, but he's God. Point number 2. Now Jesus warns the scribes. Following the exposition of Psalm 110, Jesus began warning the crowds about scribes and their hypocrisy. They love to talk. They love to walk around in the long robes. See, scribes, they had a long robes, cloth, because they were priests, of their office and be shown respect by others. Everyone will respect a scribe. They liked the chief seats in the synagogues. When the synagogue opens for prayer, they will have the prominent place. And when there is banquets, they will have the prominent place. Yet, there were those who took advantage of widows for financial gain, who at the same time offered long public prayers to mask their greed in a cloak of piety, So these people were what? They were mainly ministering in the temple, and they had a long cloak or long robe or cloth, like some of the priests in some of the religion, like a long cloth. And what happens? But these people who pretend to be so pious, so godly, but they were demanding money from whom? Even widows. In those days, widows were like helpless people, have no way to earn. And they abused their leadership, positions of leadership, right? Which is interesting, right? There may be some pastors also do the same, I think. They have, not all the place. Mostly pastors don't have much honor, much respect, right? But there are some places, some churches, there are big churches. Sometimes pastors do the same. They have all the honors. They live for honors and respect, right? Just live for respect, live for honors, and they pretend to be godly, but probably they're inside, their heart may be evil. There could be people like that even now. And that's the reason Jesus now wants to talk about widow's offering. It's a famous thing, right? Famous one. After saying, Jesus sat down near the treasury. Treasury. It is a place where large pots were stationed. Pots were kept to collect offering. It's not only one pot, there were many pots kept. That's what treasury is. It's nearby the temple. And probably if you visit Jerusalem, they might show you a place say that this is the place of treasury where they kept the pots. And Jesus sat nearby. He sat there and he observed how people were placing their offering to these pots and how there were many rich. Wow, even those days, there were rich people. They're putting large sum of money. You see, there were a lot of people there. Now, Jesus notes a specific woman. As he was watching, a poor widow came. What did she do? She put 2 small copper coins, totaling just 1 cent, which is, very, very small amount. Just 2 coins. Summoning his disciples, Jesus said to them that this poor widow had put in more than all other offerings combined. All the rich offerings combined, you calculate all the money that is in the pot, combine it, these 2 dimes are more worthy than that. Because Jesus says, they had put in out of their surplus, but she, in her poverty, had put in all that she had to live on. Such was an extraordinary example of dedication to God and confidence in God's ability to provide for those who trust him. And this is stark contrast to the testimony of the scribes. Scribes were demanding money from widows. But here's a widow gave whatever she had simply because she trusts the Lord. Is it not right? When you give to the Lord, the amount that you give to the Lord tells your trust in the Lord, right? Some people want to say they don't want to give because they think that if we give, we will lose it. If anyone thinks that they will lose it, they should not give. But if you think that God will care for you, take care of you, then you need to make sure that you give to the Lord generously for the Lord's work, right? Yes. So now let's go to that important place. So that means let's look at our Bible this time. What we are going to do is we are going to read the Bible from Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13. All right, so let me look at the introduction to that passage. This discourse, the second of 2 major discourses Mark has included in his gospel. And it took place toward the end of the day on Tuesday of the Passion Week. If Jesus was crucified on Friday, this incident took place on Tuesday. Discourse was triggered by questions from disciples in response to Jesus' statement about the destruction of the temple. Right? Destruction of the temple. In it, Jesus addressed events surrounding the tribulation period and his return to establish his kingdom. So let's look at first 4 verses of Mark 13. If you have a Bible, please open. Right? Let's look at Mark 13. Let's read first 4 verses. Can one of you read, please?
As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent building, too. So you see all these great buildings," replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left one another. Everyone will be thrown down." 3. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are all about to fulfill?"
Okay, enough. Okay, so we look at the first of all verses. First of all, Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple. Now, Jesus, as Jesus was sitting there, just nearby the temple, there was this question came, and Jesus was saying that, actually disciples commented on the size of the stones. That's the triggered thing. Triggered point was, look at how big these stones are. And if you go to Jerusalem and look at that temple mount and look at the stones, it's like huge tons, heavy, many tons weighing stones are underneath. You can see it. So size of stones are very big, very, very big. And disciples were commenting on the spectacular beauty of the temple. Temple was so beautiful, magnificent temple and all its surrounding structures. Now, a few background here. While the post-exilic or second temple, remember, what is second temple? What is post-exilic temple? Two things you need to remember. Who built the first temple? Anyone? Who built the first temple?
King Solomon.
Solomon, yes. Who destroyed that temple? Anyone?
Babylonian.
Yes, Babylonian by Nebuchadnezzar. Remember? They invaded Judea and took these people into captivity. How many years of captivity? 70 years of captivity. Captivity is also known as what? Exile. Remember?
Exile.
Exile. Means that 70 years of captivity is known as exile. So we call pre-exile and post-exile. Pre-exile means before exile, post-exile, after exile. So before exile, Solomon built. But now, so Solomon invaded, and then, I'm sorry, Solomon built the temple, he died, and Nebuchadnezzar came, he invaded, he destroyed. Then you see Ezra and Nehemiah under their leadership, the walls were rebuilt, right? Now, while the post-exile, or known as second temple, that is after the exile, was originally completed in 516 BC. Okay, 516 BC it was completed. Second temple was completed. Herod the Great had begun ambitious expansion and a beautification of the temple and its surrounding area approximately 20 BC. Before Jesus was born, Herod the Great, what? He beautified the temple. Which temple? Second temple. And that beautification continued on after his death and finally completed AD 64 after the death of Jesus Christ. What? Beautification. Herod the Great actually died maybe somewhere around probably BC's 5th or 4th year, somewhere around. Herod the Great died, and then his son Herod came. He was the main ruler when Jesus was growing up. Okay, so now what happened? So at the time of disciples' remarks, it was about in AD 30. Remember, because Jesus' death took place about AD 30. Death of Jesus Christ. All right, AD 30. That means, so that's some, like people would say 28 to 30, something like that. Maybe a little difficulty in calculating. The temple was considered one of the magnificent structures of ancient Near East, like the historian who lived at that time, Josephus, in his Antiquities, explains. Jewish temple was a magnificent one. Now, what happened? Okay, in response to disciples' comment, Jesus pointed to large buildings of temple complex. Now, see, it's not only temple was so large, the complex surrounding area, there were a lot of large buildings. And Jesus stated that no one stone would be left upon another. All would be torn down. That is what Jesus said. What did Jesus say? You see this magnificent temple? This is going to be destroyed. This will not stay there. This prediction generally understood to refer to the destruction of the temple by Roman army in AD 70. AD 70, what happened? Roman governor Titus invaded Jerusalem and destroyed this temple, right? And still now after that it is never rebuilt. Okay, because generally the prediction of Jesus has been fulfilled after his death when Roman army invaded. Following this statement, Jesus led his band out of the city east toward Bethany to spend night. After scaling the path to the top of the Mount Olives, Jesus sat down to rest. So, if you look at the Mount Olives, is just the other side of the Temple Mount, the other side. Jesus sat there to rest. Temple Mount clearly visible to the west. Now, Peter, James, and John and Andrew came over to him, began questioning him, connecting Jesus' reference to the destruction of the temple with end times. They asked when this destruction would take place and what would be the signs that would serve as precursors of the end. So that what we have read now is that situation. Peter, James, and John and Andrew came and asked Jesus for clarification. Hey, you said this temple is going to be destroyed, and you said, things are going to be different. So when it is going to be, and they want to also ask what really happens at the end. Now, few things to note here. It's important to realize these events are recorded in other places also. That is especially Luke chapter 21. Now let me begin again. This section presents Jesus' answer to the second question above. Okay, verses 5 to 23 that we are going to read now, it actually answers to the second question. There are two questions asked. Number one question, Jesus said, the stone will not stand upon another. The temple will be destroyed. They want to know when it will be destroyed. When temple will be destroyed. That is the answer they are looking at, number one. Second, they want to know the signs of Jesus coming to establish kingdom. Establish kingdom. So two questions. Mark explains the answers to the second question, signs of Jesus' kingdom. Right? Jesus' answer to the first question concerning the destruction of the temple, it is generally argued, is found only in Luke's account of Olivet Discourse. Okay, let's look at that one. Right? Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21, verse 12 to 24. Okay. Luke chapter 21. Can one of you read? Verse from 12.
But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm and you will win life.
Read down. Okay, read down till 24.
When you,
Mm.
when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this temple. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations.
Mm. Go ahead.
Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
Okay, that is quite fascinating description, right? So what you have read until that is the answer to the question, the first question. What is the first question? What happens when the destruction of the temple happens? You said this temple is going to be destroyed. And Jesus says, the Gentiles army, when they stand in front of the temple, you understand it is going to be destroyed. And what is going to happen? Yeah, Jewish people are going to be taken captive, right? Taken captive to various nations, right? So you know that from in AD 70, that captivity began. Roman Empire came and invaded, and they were taken to various parts of European countries and other places. They went. Jewish people went. They were spread. They were taken captive to various places, right? So that means still, even now, these people are outside of Jerusalem or outside of Israel. Okay, so Jesus answers to the first question, and that answer is only found in Luke chapter 21. Whether Matthew or Mark doesn't give the answer to the first question, that is the destruction of the temple and what will happen, right? The second question is this one: what are the signs of Jesus coming? Signs to establish his kingdom, messianic kingdom. Okay, what are the signs? Now, the answer to the second question falls into two divisions. The first, verses 5 to 13 of Mark, chapter 13, 5 to 13, addresses events within the first half of the tribulation period. All right? Referred to in the book of, in the Gospel of Matthew as the beginning of birth of pangs. So let me so again here. Okay? Let's take a tribulation period, right? In the Gospel of Mark and Gospel of Matthew or Gospel of Luke, that tribulation period is divided into two. In Gospel of Matthew, Matthew would call these as the beginning of birth pangs. Birth pangs. Okay? And so that is this one. And this is known as the great tribulation. The second part. Right? So tribulation period is divided into two. The first portion is known as the beginning of the birth pang. Second portion is known as the great tribulation. If you read book of Revelation, in the book of Revelation, we will read that this has got 7 years, that is 3.5 years in the first and 3.5 years in the second. Right? It is divided. That's what book of Revelation says. Book of Daniel will call figuratively 1 week, which is meaning is 7 years. Okay? That's what Daniel would say. So we'll go there. All right, we will go. Let's read the first half. According to Matthew, he would say, this is the beginning of birth pangs. Let's look at Mark chapter 13, verses 5. Okay, reading from 5 to 13. Let's read that one. Mark chapter 13, verse 5.
Jesus said to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdoms against kingdoms. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginning of the birth pain. You
Okay.
must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what you say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit.
Okay, read till 13. Two more verses.
Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his children. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved.
All right. So this is the description of the first half of tribulation period. Usually there is a problem for people. What is the problem? When they read these passages, what would they say? For example, verse 8. Okay, verse 7. Right, verse 7. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. These things must take place. So suddenly we think this way. Are there not wars now? Yes, right? You have a war that is going on, 1 year anniversary, they are celebrating or they're saying something about 1 year completed, the war between Russia and Ukraine and the West. Now the question is, so are there not wars before? Yes, Second World War. And there was a First World War, right? So wars were there. So now here also you read wars and rumors of war. Now please understand, all the wars and wars that you see is not what Matthew or Mark is talking about. That's not what they're saying. They are saying during the tribulation period, there will be so much wars, right? not one or two. Most of the nations will be ready to wage war against each other. That is the idea. Second, that, for example, the nation will rise up against nations, kingdom against kingdoms, and earthquakes in various places, famines. Do we see earthquakes now? Yes. Were there earthquakes before? Yes. Were there earthquakes before 2,000 years ago? Yes. Yes. Were there famine years ago? Yes. So is that the Bible talks about? No. What Mark or Matthew or Luke talks about, at times of several earthquakes during tribulation period, there will be many instances of famines all over the world. That is what we have to understand. So what Matthew and Mark is not talking about what we see now. What they are talking about are the signs of the kingdom. When kingdom is going to be established, just before that, these things will take place, right? These things will take place. So that is what we have read now. So this is known as beginning of birth of pangs. So that is the first. Okay, the first 3.5 years of tribulation period. The second half, that is reading from verses 14 to 23, focuses on the events within the second half of the tribulation. Second half of the tribulation. In this case, referred to as the period of great tribulation. Matthew will call it as great tribulation. Now, let's look at Mark chapter 13, verse 14 to 23. Mark chapter 13, verse 14 onwards until 23, about 9 verses.
When you see the abomination that causes desolation.
Okay, 1 second, right? When you read that verse, whether in Matthew or Mark, abomination of desolation, you know what has to come into your mind? The prophecy of Daniel. We'll go there, right? We will go there. Abomination of desolation is prophesied by Daniel also. But let's finish reading this one. When you see abomination of desolation, go ahead.
Let the reader understand then. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house to take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those who will be days of distress, unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "Look, there he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time.
Okay, so that is the second half, right? Now that means what divide the first half and the second half? It is the abomination of desolation. Now let's go back to Daniel chapter 9, right? Daniel chapter 9, he talks about 70 weeks for 70 weeks for Israel, for the kingdom to begin. All right, now let's go to Daniel chapter, and 70 weeks, that means that 70 weeks actually, if you really look at the calculation, it is talking about 490 years, right? 490 years. That okay. So 1 week is equal to 7 years. That is the calculation that we see that Daniel is saying. So 1 week means 7 years. Let's look at Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. Okay, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. Okay, 24 to 27. Go ahead. Anyone can read.
Daniel
Daniel chapter 9 verse 24. Go ahead.
77 are decreed for year period, your period and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up visions and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place.
Okay, read until 27.
Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 and 62 sevens. It will be repealed with streets and a dredge, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed.
Okay, now Daniel begins to talk about, use that word, desolations are determined. Now look at verse 27 clearly. Now 27, so he says there is going to be a ruler coming, right? A ruler coming. And now what is he going to do? Let's look at verse 27.
Daniel,
Yes, same. Look at that verse 27.
he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7.
Okay, that means 1 week, 1 second. It says he will make a treaty with many for 1 week. The idea is that Antichrist will make a treaty with Jewish people, Israel, for 1 week. The idea is for 7 years. 1 week means 7 years. So 62 plus 9, 62 plus another 7. 69 weeks are complete by the death of the anointed one, which is the death of Jesus Christ, right? 69 weeks are completed. I'm not going to deep into the calculation of the numbers, but 62 plus 7, 69 weeks are completed when Jesus Christ died. And then there is 1 more week remains. That is 7 more years remain, right? Daniel will call it as a 1 week, right? Now, what the Antichrist does, he will make a treaty with Israel because he's going to bring peace to Middle East. He's going to bring peace to Jewish people, right? He will solve the problem of Jewish people in the Middle East, right? There is a problem that will never be solved until Antichrist will come. But what happens? Look at that verse again. But,
in the middle of
go ahead. In the middle of?
In the middle of the 7th, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering.
Okay. In the middle of the 7 or the middle of the week, that is in the middle of the tribulation period, when 3.5 years are over, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. He will stop sacrifices. Then what will happen?
And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation.
Yes, now you heard the word abomination that causes desolation. What Antichrist is going to do, he's going to bring abomination, which is hated by Jewish people to sacrifice. You know, for Jewish people, there are rules and regulations for sacrifices that they can bring to the temple. But he's going to bring abominations, right, to the temple. And then so you see the abomination of desolation, is brought by Antichrist at the middle of the tribulation period. Now let's come back to Mark. Let's look at our notes now. So this is what we see. Okay, the tribulation itself corresponds to the final week of Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks, the period of time in which God will fulfill his promises to the nation of Israel, culminating with the assuring of the millennial kingdom. The last or the 7th week of Daniel prophecy, that is the tribulation, is the subject of much of the Old Testament prophecy involving judgment portion of the prophetic day of the Lord. And these tribulation judgments are vividly described in Revelation chapter 6, verse 1 to chapter 19, verse 21. Throughout this book of Revelation, the judgment that happens during 7 years are described. So we read those passages. Okay. Let me go to the second half here. Let me explain here. Second half of the tribulation, right here. So that is point number B, verses 14 to 23. Second half of the tribulation would begin with the Antichrist breaking his covenant with Israel. Okay, in the middle of the tribulation, halting the daily sacrifices in Jerusalem, setting up an image of himself in the temple to be worshipped as God. The greatest abomination is going to be Antichrist telling Jewish people to worship him. Right? The 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 actually talks about that. Jesus warned his disciples that when they saw this image, referred to as the abomination of desolation, set up in the holy place, then all those in Judea should immediately flee. That is what Jesus says. What Jewish people should do. You should flee Judea. Those on the housetops should not take time to get anything out of their houses, nor should those in the field attempt first to pick up their coats. Woe to those believers in Judea. Jesus said that were pregnant or nursing babies when the second half of the tribulation began. Woe to them. It's going to be extremely difficult. I remember when this earthquake happened in Turkey, the weather was so cold, right? It was so cold, and it was so many died because of the weather, because of this cold. They couldn't survive under the rubble, and many deaths happened even that because of that. So Jesus says you should pray that it does not take place in winter, when fleeing would be hindered by inclement weather. All right, so Jesus explains, and the second half would be unprecedented judgment poured upon the earth. Right, and he says, because of the elect, the days will be shortened. Okay, now, so we have this. I'm not going to the details there because we have explained here. Now let's look at point number 3, coming of the Son of Man. Following the above judgment, Jesus continued, the sun would be darkened and the moon would lose its light. Stars would fall. Satan and all his authority would be shaken. Then Jesus, as the Messianic Son of Man, would descend from heaven, surrounded by clouds with great power and glory, and all would see him. All, the entire world will see him. At that time, he would send forth his angels to gather together from the 4 points of the compass all the elect. He's going to gather the elect, those truly, genuinely saved, who had survived the tribulation judgments. He would raise tribulation martyrs around the Old Testament, along with the Old Testament saints. We will discuss about that in our eschatology about the resurrections. Right? We are going to discuss in detail. And he would establish his kingdom, banishing unbelievers to Hades, casting Satan into abyss, and throwing Antichrist and the false prophets into the lake of fire. So that's what is going to happen during the end of the tribulation period. All right. This is not an exhaustive explanation. This is a simple information about the tribulation and how things are going to be. But we are going to learn about this topic in detail in the months to come, maybe sometime later as we wrap up this course at the end when we study the eschatology. All right. Now Jesus talks about a few parables, and we will pause it here. Parable of the fig tree. Jesus concluded the discourse with the two parables. First is about the fig tree, right? It was designed to reinforce truth and certainty of his end time prediction. Jesus using this one to reinforce his prediction. Jesus directed his disciples to learn a lesson from the fig tree. When the branches of the fig tree became tender and put forth its leaves, disciples knew what? Summer was near. Right, as I was coming here, there are some of the trees here started to shred its leaves. Trees becoming empty, which is another sign here that warmer weather, summer is coming. Even so, Jesus said, whenever they saw things happening that he had just taught, they were to recognize his return was very near. All right. So truly he declared that generation witnessed these events would not pass away until all of these things had taken place. Heaven and earth would pass away. Jesus affirmed his words would never fail. They would transpire precisely as he had spoken to them. Right. So what Jesus is saying, like a fig tree, right, shred its leaves or becomes tender, put forth its leaf. When you see the events of this tribulation, you have to understand Jesus is coming very soon. Within couple of years or few years, Jesus is coming. That is what the parable of fig trees tells. One more parable of the steward. Second parable of the steward, was intended to challenge the disciples to be vigilant, since events surrounding Jesus' return could begin at any moment. Right? That is what Jesus says. These events can begin at any moment. They were to take heed and be alert, Jesus warned, because time appointed for these things to take place was unknown by them. They don't know, right? They don't know. Nobody knows, but it can take place at any time. And he talked about a parable about an owner of a house. That's a parable. It's about an owner of a house who had gone on a journey, and he had left the care of his house to his servants. Servants are to care. He assigned each of his servants to specific area of responsibility. All his properties and house and specific areas of this house were given to various people, and they have to take care and charge the doorkeeper to stay alert, so that when he returned, he could open the door and announce his return to others. All right, that was a simple parable. Then he applied the parable to his disciples. He challenged them to be ever alert like a doorkeeper. You should be always alert. They did not know when the master of the house will return. They don't know. Nobody knows. Whether in the evening, midnight, or daybreak, before daybreak or sunrise, nobody knows. They were to stay prepared lest the master should come unexpectedly. and find them asleep. That is morally and spiritually lax. You might be asleep, like you may be spiritually, morally asleep. You are lax, you are lazy. Jesus concluded by saying that all of his disciples should be ever vigilant for his return. Each of his servants will certainly give an account of his conduct and stewardship when Jesus will return.